Picture a museum case, glass-fronted, climate-controlled. The kind of case they put relics in, coins, jewellery, manuscripts, things someone decided were worth preserving. Now look at what's inside this one. A dented tin bowl, grey, scratched on the inside from years of use. Holds maybe a cup and a half of liquid. A short wooden spike, the end worn smooth. Worn smooth by human hands. Thousands of human hands. A rectangle of coarse grey cloth, stiff as old cardboard, roughly sewn. What they called a uniform. A small iron key on a ring, the kind that doesn't open anything you'd want opened. And a ledger, cloth-bound, water-damaged at one corner. Inside, in careful copper plate, hundreds of names, or rather, numbers assigned to names. People reduced to entries. These objects are sitting in a display case in a regional museum in the English Midlands. The label reads, Everyday Workhouse Artifacts, circa 1840 to 1870. They look boring. That's the point. They were designed to be boring. They were designed to be nothing. Because the people who used them were supposed to feel like nothing. These are everyday objects from 19th-century poorhouses across Europe. And every single one of them was a weapon. I make these history stories, sleep stories people call them, though I genuinely cannot tell whether the people listening are drifting off peacefully or lying rigid in the dark thinking, oh God, and this particular topic has been sitting in my notes for a long time, because it's one of those subjects where the closer you look, the worse it gets. So, get comfortable. If you're already comfortable, appreciate it. Actually take a moment, because where we're going tonight, nobody was comfortable. Here we go. Let's start with the bowl. That tin porringer in the museum case, dented on one side, probably from being dropped on a stone floor. No handle. The interior darkened from decades of use, the grey enamel chipped down to bare metal in 3 places along the rim. It held gruel, not porridge, not soup, gruel, which is what you get when you take oatmeal and add so much water that it stops being food and becomes the idea of food. A thin, pale liquid with granules floating in it. Warm, just barely warm, because it has travelled from the kitchen to the ward in a stack covered by a cloth, and by the time it reaches you it is more memory of warmth than actual warmth. This bowl held your breakfast, it held your supper, sometimes it held your dinner. It was the most important object in your life. It held 6 ounces. You need to understand what 6 ounces means. 6 ounces is less than a can of soup. It is the legal minimum the Guardians were required to provide. It is what Parliament decided, after careful deliberation and considerable debate, that a pauper needed to sustain themselves through a working day. They never gave more than the minimum. We're going back tonight, not to look at museum cases. We're going inside one of those cases. We're picking up the bowl, feeling the weight of it, which is nothing, because it's empty, which is also the whole story. You don't need to open your eyes to know this. You knew it was coming because your body knew. Because your body has learned, in the weeks since you arrived, to live in a constant low hum of readiness for sounds, for the specific sounds that mean something is about to be required of you. The rattle of a bolt, the groan of a wooden door on iron hinges, hard-soled shoes on stone flags, up, not loud, not a shout, just a word dropped into the dark the same way every morning, up, like you're a machine being switched on, like the word is a key and you're the lock and everything that follows is just operation. You open your eyes. The ceiling above you is whitewashed and low. There are water stains in one corner where the plaster has been damp and dried and damp again across what feels like years, maybe decades, before you, before anyone you know. This plaster was absorbing water and releasing it, and absorbing it again. You have mapped those stains the way a sailor maps coastlines. The brown one shaped like a boot, the pale one that might be a bird or might be nothing at all. This is what your mind does when there is nothing else to look at. The room is 30 feet long, 15 feet wide, stone floor, 10 iron bedsteads, each one occupied. Occupied is the word, not slept in. Because sleep here is something you fall into and claw back out of, not something you rest inside. The bed is a wooden board under a thin straw mattress that has known 100 bodies before yours and will know 100 after, and the blanket is rough wool that scratches your neck if you pull it too high, and the cold comes up through the floor and through the mattress and into your bones regardless of the season. It is early March, 1847, northern England, a mill town called Merton, though the name barely matters. The poorhouse in Merton is the same as the poorhouse in Leeds is the same as the poorhouse in Manchester is the same as the poorhouse in Cork, in Glasgow, in Rotterdam, in Lyon. Different countries, different languages, same grey walls, same tin bowl, same 5:30 rattle of the bolt. The smell reaches you before you're fully upright. You've been here long enough that on most days you don't notice it. That's what the human nose does. It adapts, it forgives, it stops reporting what it's decided is background. But every morning, in those first seconds before the defences are up, it arrives fresh. So it hits you now. 60-odd bodies in a ward built for 40. The accumulated weight of people who are given one wash per week in a tin trough at the end of the corridor. Cold water, a shared sliver of soap worn to the size of a child's thumbnail. The smell of the chamber pot in the corner, emptied each morning but present all night, in a room with one small frosted window shut since October. Beneath the human smell, old stone, lime plaster, something fungal growing in the corner behind the third bed where water comes through after hard rain. Boiled starch from the laundry below, rising through the floorboards. Coal smoke from the kitchen flue when the wind is from the north. And beneath all of it, something harder to name. Something that is not a smell exactly, but that accumulates in rooms like this one and coats the surfaces and hangs in the air. You couldn't name it when you first arrived. Now you can. Despair, which you carry with you when you leave and which you think, sometimes, has gotten into the cloth of your uniform and will not wash out. Up. The monitor's name is Mr. Pierce, 30-something, brown hair, a limp from some old injury that he never explains. He sits at the end of the workshop each day with a ledger and marks production figures, and he says up each morning with the specific intonation of a man who has said the same word in the same room for long enough that it has lost any meaning beyond function. He is not cruel, not in any dramatic sense. He is the cruelty of a system made sufficiently routine that individual cruelty becomes unnecessary. You swing your legs off the bed. Your feet hit the stone floor and the cold shoots through your soles, up through your ankles, into the joints of your knees like a reminder that the body exists and is in a place that does not care about it. Welcome to the Merton Union Workhouse, March of 1847. Your name is Will Ashton. You're 19 years old. You've been here 6 weeks. Let me tell you about the uniform, because it's in the museum case, that rectangle of coarse grey cloth, and it looks like nothing. It looks like a piece of bad fabric. It looks like someone's ugly old curtain. But when they gave it to you on your first day, when the receiving officer, a thin man with a moustache called Mr. Fenwick, handed it across the counter, and told you to put your own clothes in the box. You felt something happen that was difficult to name. Your clothes were not much. A wool jacket you'd owned for 3 years, worn through at both elbows. Trousers. Boots that needed resoling but were still boots. A shirt. Not much, but they were yours. They had your smell in them. They knew the shape of your shoulders. They had been with you through weather. You folded them into the box. Mr. Fenwick wrote your name in the ledger, assigned you a number, 247, and slid the uniform across the counter. Coarse grey wool, so stiff it barely folds. A jacket cut without any notion of the human body, made in a prison workshop somewhere, designed to last rather than fit, to cover rather than clothe. Trousers the same, a linen shirt rough as sailcloth, a pair of shoes, black, stitched to a last that fits neither of your feet properly, the left one pinching across the arch, the right one loose at the heel. You put them on in the receiving room, a bench, a hook on the wall, the click of Fenwick's pen in the ledger, and here is what the museum label does not explain. The moment you put on the uniform, you stopped being Will Ashton. You became 247, not in any ceremony, not any way anyone announced. Just a fact that settled into you as the rough collar touched your neck. That the world outside these walls knew Will Ashton from Stanwick. The world inside these walls knew 247 from Ward B. And the world inside these walls was, for now, all there was. They kept your clothes in the box. If you left, when you left, they would give them back. If, when. You kept adjusting those words in your head and never quite settling on one. This matters, so stay with it for a moment. Your father was a hand-loom weaver in the village of Stanwick, 8 miles from Merton. 20 years ago he made a decent wage. Not comfortable. Nobody in Stanwick was comfortable, but decent. Enough. He had a cottage, a broad loom, a wife, 4 children. The cloth he wove went to a merchant in Leeds who paid him by the yard. Then the mills came. Not to Stanwick. Stanwick was too small, too far from the canals. But to Merton, to Leeds, to Bradford. Power looms that produced in an hour what your father produced in a day. The merchant stopped coming. Then he sent his agent with a new offer. We'll still take the cloth, but the price per yard is now 1/3 of what it was. Your father took the offer. What else could he do? By 1843 he was earning less than the cottage needed. By 1845 the last of the savings were gone. By January of 1847 your mother was dead of typhus, and your father's hands had developed something. A tremor, a weakness. The doctor in Merton said he couldn't be certain what. That made the work impossible. Your 2 sisters went into service in Bradford. Your younger brother went to your aunt in Halifax. And you, the eldest, 19, with nothing particular to offer anyone. You walked the 8 miles from Stanwick to Merton on a grey Tuesday morning in a late January, carrying your jacket and your worn boots, and you stood at the gate of the Merton Union Workhouse on Harker Street and you knocked. They let you in. Because that is what workhouses were for. The ledger in the museum case. Cloth-bound, water-stained at one corner. The archivist who catalogued it found 847 entries inside. Some are clearly the same person, entered and discharged and re-entered, the cycle repeating across months. Admitted, discharged, admitted again. Family split on entry, men to the men's ward, women to the women's, children to the children's, the old and infirm to the infirmary, then theoretically reunited on discharge. Entry 247, William Ashton, age 19, occupation, labourer, previous parish, Stanwyck. Admitted. 23rd January 1847. Cause of destitution. Want of employment. Want of employment. 5 words that cover the collapse of everything. The loom, the merchant, the power mills, the typhus, your mother's grave in the Stanwyck churchyard, your father's trembling hands. 5 words in careful copper plate, in a ledger, in a museum case. Mr. Fenwick wrote them without looking up. He had written them hundreds of times. He would write them hundreds more. You watched his pen scratch the paper. Your name becoming a number, becoming an entry in a list of entries in a place that held lists of entries. You wanted to say something. You weren't sure what. You said nothing. Mr. Fenwick blotted the ink and moved on to the next box on the form. Mr. Pierce doesn't wait for you to fully wake. The first weeks, that was one of the hardest things. The body needs transition, needs that slow unfolding from sleep to waking, where you lie for a moment and remember who you are, where you are, what day it is. There is no such luxury at 5:30 in Ward B. You've learned to be vertical before full consciousness arrives. Boots on first, always a moment because your fingers are stiff in the morning, the cold having worked into the joints overnight, and the laces on the right boot are too long, and have a tendency to knot in the night as though trying to make themselves into something more complicated than they are. Jacket buttoned. Number 247 sewn to the breast pocket in white thread by the women's workshop. The ward empties itself. 15 men, 12 of working age, 3 elderly. You have memorized them with the thoroughness of someone who has no other choice. Old Thomas, who was a bricklayer for 40 years and now has a back that will not fully straighten. He moves in the mornings in a particular, careful way, each joint tested before weight is put on it, the way you test ice before you cross it. Edward, who nobody knows much about. He speaks very little. He eats without looking at his food. When asked a direct question, he answers it exactly. Nothing more. Nothing more. A man everyone calls the captain, who was neither a captain nor clearly anything else they can identify, and who spends his evenings murmuring to himself about a ship. What ship? Which voyage? Nobody knows and no one asks, because in the workhouse you do not ask questions that might have answers you'd have to carry. You file out. The corridor is stone flags, 15 feet of it. Then the washroom on the left. A trough of iron, 8 feet long, 3 feet wide. Cold water. A shared bar of tallow soap on a rope. In winter you break the skin of ice with your fist. In early March it is just cold. Cold that enters through the skin of your face and takes your breath for a second like a slap. You splash. Rub your jaw. You do not linger. Nobody lingers. The smell of the tallow soap is something animal, something cheap, cutting through the ward smell for a few seconds like a window opening. Then you're back in the corridor and it closes again, down the stairs, into the yard. The yard in the early March is every shade of grey. Not just the sky, though the sky is also grey, heavy cloud coming from the northwest promising rain, but the stone paving, the stone walls, the stone facade of the main building on the north side. 3 stories, symmetrical windows, a certain brutal dignity in the architecture that stops just short of dignity. This building was built in 1836, 2 years after the Poor Law Amendment Act, which formalised these places. Poorhouses had existed before the Act. Parish relief, hospital asylums, scattered arrangements that were inconsistent and humane in the way that inconsistent things sometimes are. Random, dependent on who happened to be in charge. The Amendment Act decided to be consistent. less eligibility, they called the central principle. The condition of the pauper inside the workhouse must always be less eligible, meaning less desirable, than the condition of the lowest independent labourer outside. In theory, the workhouse should always be a last resort, not a first one. You should never choose it over working. In practice, here you are, 5:30 in the morning, stone floor, tin bowl, 6 ounces. The men's yard is about 40 feet square. A wall, higher than a man can see over, separates it from the women's yard. You've not seen a woman since you arrived. Not properly. You might have glimpsed some through a gap near the kitchen corridor. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to see your family if you have family here. The separation is by design. You arrive, you are divided. Husband from wife, parents from children over 7, the old and sick from the able-bodied, subdivided and subdivided again into categories. This discourages dependency. That is the language from the parliamentary reports, which meant this will make you so uncomfortable that you will leave as soon as an alternative presents itself. The problem was that for many people inside these walls, no alternative was presenting itself. The bell rings at 6. The bell is everything here. It hangs in a small tower above the main entrance, a plain cast iron thing with no particular distinction, and it rings 9 times a day. Wake, wash, breakfast, morning work, dinner, afternoon work, supper, evening prayer, sleep. The day is divided by the bell, and the bell is the day, and the bell is the only thing that changes in the unchanging pattern of these weeks. On your first day you heard it and thought, I will get used to that. You were wrong. Nobody gets used to it. The sound goes through you each time like a physical intrusion, a demand, a sound that means do something now or there will be consequences. 6 weeks in and your body flinches at it before your mind has processed it. Breakfast is in the main hall. Long tables, long benches, no tablecloths. The room seats 200 if everyone sits close, and there are never fewer than 200. The ceiling is high with exposed beams, whitewashed, and the sound when it's full is a particular kind of muted roar, not conversation, because conversation during meals is not permitted, but the sound of 200 people being physically present, breathing, moving, the scrape of benches on stone, the clink of tin on wood. You find your usual seat near the middle of the second table, Thomas to your left, a young man named Joseph to your right, recently arrived from somewhere east of here, still learning not to look startled by everything. The porringers come down the table, passed hand to hand. You take yours, 6 ounces of gruel. Let me tell you what gruel smells like. Almost nothing. Warm water with a faint grain underneath, something that is trying to be oat and mostly failing. Like someone described porridge to someone who had never made porridge, and they did their best. What it looks like: grey-white, slightly gelatinous, granules settled at the bottom. If you tilt the bowl, the liquid runs to one side clear and the granules stay. What it tastes like: you know the feeling when you wake in the night very thirsty and drink water in the dark. How the water has texture from being so necessary. Gruel tastes like water that has been trying. You eat it with a wooden spoon. The spoon is yours, assigned like everything else, your number scratched into the handle with a nail. You eat slowly. You've learned this. Slow eating stretches the time, persuades your stomach it is receiving more than it is, and the 20 minutes of breakfast is the only period in the day when you are permitted to sit and do nothing but exist. Eat. Listen. Thomas is eating without looking at his food. He has the expression of a man who has consumed 10,000 meals and expects nothing particular from any of them. Joseph is eating too fast, which you did in your first week, and which will result by 8 o'clock in a hollow feeling that is somehow worse than ordinary hunger, because it has the quality of something promised and withdrawn. A serving of bread comes today, not every day. Tuesdays and Fridays a 2-ounce piece of bread comes with breakfast. Coarse, dark, close textured, made from whatever flour was cheapest that week, baked in the workhouse kitchen. It has a hard crust and a dense interior, and it is the best thing in this building. You make it last 4 bites. That's discipline. In your first week you ate it in 1. Old Thomas gets a slightly larger portion, additional allowances for men over 60 and light work, and you watch him divide it with precise care, wrapping 1/2 in the cloth he keeps in his jacket pocket reserved for the evening. You'll do that someday, you think. When this feels entirely normal to you, you're not sure whether the thought is a comfort or a warning. After breakfast, work. The men's workshop is on the ground floor, east wing. A long room, 20 feet of it given to a workbench running its whole length. Natural light from small windows set high in the wall. The kind of light that is adequate for the task but does not offer anything beyond adequacy. On the bench, oakum. Old oakum. Coils of it, dark and stiff. Tarred rope that has come from dockyards and ships. Rope that has been used until it could no longer be used as rope, and now has a second life. You're going to take it apart, fibre by fibre. You pick up a coil, maybe 2 feet long, 3 inches thick, tarred hemp, stiff as wood in places from the cold and from age. The smell of it is sharp and layered, coal tar dominant, salt water underneath it, and beneath that something old and slightly rotten. The smell of rope that has been in contact with ocean water and bilge water and weather for years. You press your thumbnail into the lay of the rope and begin. This is oakum picking. It has been your work for 6 weeks. It will be your work until they move you or you leave or something else happens. The process is simple. You unravel the 3-strand rope into its component fibres, then pull those fibres apart until what you have is a loose, soft material like dirty brown fluff. That material goes into a pile. When there is enough, it gets sold to shipyards, where it's used as caulking, pressed into the seams of wooden hulls to make them watertight. So, the labour of 19th-century paupers keeping ships from sinking. You would think that would be mentioned more. It is not mentioned. The work is not complicated. That is the worst part. If it were complicated, it would require thought. You could lose yourself in the thinking. Instead, it can be done in your sleep. You've done it half asleep, your first weeks, barely conscious, hands moving automatically while your mind went elsewhere. The body learns the motion and performs it without you. But your hands are a record of 6 weeks. The tar works into the cuts in your fingertips. The ends of your fingers have split along the nail lines, tiny fissures that sting when sweat gets into them. The pads of your thumbs have calloused in new ways, hard ridges where the rope edge catches during the unravelling motion. The skin between your index and middle fingers is raw. There is a wooden spike on the bench. That is the object in the museum case, the worn one, the one smooth from use. You use it to lever under the lay of the rope to start the unravelling. Short, 8 inches long, the end rounded from decades of the same motion repeated by different hands. Press, lever, pull. You pick it up, fit it into your palm. The wood is warm from the room. Press it into the first coil. The sound. a dry creak as the rope yields, a resistance, then a giving way, the fibres separating where they were bound. You work. Around you, 17 other men are working. The room has the sound of this, continuous creaking and tearing, the soft thud of loosened fibres hitting the wood, the occasional shift of someone changing position on the bench. Old Thomas, 3 seats down, coughs, a sound you've been tracking for 2 weeks, noting its frequency, its increasing depth, the way he now braces one hand on the bench when it comes on. The tar smell thickens as the rope warms from handling. Pierce is at the end of the room with his ledger. A man is expected to produce 4 pounds of oakum per day, which is monitored by weight at end of shift. Fall short, and there are consequences. Exceed it, and you may find your quota increased the following week. You hit 4 pounds. Exactly 4 pounds. Every day. Now. The museum label. That spike in the glass case. You can see where the wood has darkened, where it has been worn smooth. That's not time. That's not the museum. That is 10,000 hands. That is a full generation of inmates pressing that tool into that rope, morning after morning, and the residue of their palms left in the grain of the wood. 10,000 hands doing the same motion. Workhouses across England had oakum rooms. Scotland too. Ireland. Though Ireland's situation in 1847 has its own specific horror that we will come to. Germany had its Arbeitshäuser, workhouses where the principle was the same. The poor would prove their deservingness through the purifying nature of labour. French dépôts de mendicité had workrooms where the elderly and the young and the sick worked side by side. Not out of solidarity, but because they all occupied the same category, unproductive, requiring remedy. Dutch institutions had patients picking oakum in the same rooms as people recovering from illness, because the distinction between the sick and the poor was, in the accounting of these places, not always clear. Same spike, different languages, same creak of rope, same tar-stained hands. What did they think about, all those thousands of people, while their hands did this? Some of them talked when the monitor's back was turned. Joseph Hare arrived 3 weeks after you in mid-February. He's 17, thin in the way that means he was thin before he got here, thin in the bone structure, not thin from the gruel. He comes from a village east of Merton. His father is still there, sick. His mother and 2 sisters applied at the same time Joseph did and were admitted to the women's wards. Joseph's mother is 40 feet away, on the other side of the wall. Joseph has not spoken to her since admission. You know this because he told you in the yard on his 3rd day, when Pierce was distracted by a new arrival, and the angle of supervision was briefly insufficient. 3 minutes. You stood near the north wall where the sight line is slightly reduced, and you talked. He told you about his family. You told him about yours, and he looked at you with that particular expression that new arrivals have, the one that wants to ask, how long have you been here, and compute from your answers to what their own prospects might be. 6 weeks, you said. He said nothing, but you could see the calculation happening. If you had been here 6 weeks, it meant either you had nowhere to go, or you had concluded that nowhere to go was preferable to everywhere else. Both things were true. Joseph works 3 benches down from you. He's a fast picker, faster than you were in your first weeks, compensating for anxiety with speed. Speed is a mistake. You go through the easy rope and then hit a section that's been improperly tarred or 3 years old and practically petrified, and your fingers cramp, and you still have 2 hours until the afternoon bell and 2 pounds still to go. You watch him without being obvious. Pierce is looking at his ledger. You catch Joseph's eye. Hold up 2 fingers. Slow down. He frowns. You mime the picking motion. Deliberate strokes. Spaced. He watches. Gets it. He slows down. Pierce looks up. Both of you are staring at your rope. That is the totality of it. That is everything. A hand signal across a workshop meaning pace yourself. That is what 6 weeks of institutional life has reduced human community to. The skill of communicating care across a room using your fingers without being caught doing it. The spike creaks. The fibers separate. 4 hours until the midday bell. The boys' yard backs against the men's yard. A single wall between them. Not the same as the women's side. The women are further away, completely separated other side of the building. But the boys are close enough that on quiet days you hear them. They pick oakum too, the ones over 12. Boys under 12 are supposed to be in the schoolroom for 2 hours each day. The rest of the time they work. There is a boy named Samuel in the adjacent ward. You know his name because Edward, the quiet man who never says anything beyond what is asked, mentioned it once, 6 weeks ago, and then never mentioned it again. Edward's nephew, 9 years old, admitted the same day as Edward. They are 40 feet apart. They have not spoken since November. This is not an accident. This is the design. The designers of the system had considered the possibility that families might enter the workhouse voluntarily rather than suffer genuine privation, simply to stay together in a time of difficulty. The separation was the remedy. If you were here, you were genuinely desperate. The weight of separation was additional evidence and additional encouragement. In theory. In practice. Edward, 62 years old, former bricklayer, sits near you every morning and picks rope apart and does not speak about Samuel. You were in the yard once when the boys were in the adjacent yard. You could hear them. Voices, high-pitched, the particular register of boys being boys even when they're supposed to be something else. You heard laughter, brief, stopped quickly by someone, and then singing. A single boy's voice, thin and clear. Something you didn't know the words to. It lasted maybe 30 seconds before silence took it back. You stared at the wall between the yards for a long time. Thursday morning. Old Thomas did not come to work. When the bell rang and the ward emptied, Thomas stayed in the bed. That is not supposed to happen. The rules contain no provision for it. You are either in the infirmary or you are working. If you are a leave and not assigned to the infirmary, you work. But Pierce came in, looked at Thomas, looked at the colour of his face, which was a colour that did not belong on a living man's face, a grey-white that had been building for days, and he said, "Infirmary." 2 of the stronger men helped Thomas down the corridor. You watched his face as they passed. He looked small. That is the word for it. Men in their 60s who were bricklayers for 40 years should not look small. You could see what Thomas had been in the width of his hands, the set of his shoulders. But this morning, being helped down the stone corridor in his grey uniform, he looked like something had been taken out of him. Some essential volume. You went to the workshop. You picked your oakum. You thought about Thomas. The infirmary is at the back of the building, ground floor, separate from the main wards. You have passed its door several times. Plain wood, a small square window cut into it at eye height. You have looked through that window once, briefly. A long room, iron beds, a smell that came through the glass and around the frame. Carbolic mixed with something else. Something more organic, something that carbolic was trying to cover and not entirely succeeding. Let me be exact about what the workhouse infirmary is and is not. It has a medical officer, Dr. Halstead, who visits on Tuesday and Friday mornings. It has a nursing attendant, an older inmate, a woman named Mrs. Breen, assigned this responsibility because she has shown some competence and some reliability, though her training consists entirely of what she has learned through proximity to illness over the decades of her life. It has bandages, it has some medicines, it has beds with mattresses slightly better than the ward mattresses. It is equipped for recovery from ordinary things, a broken bone set properly, a cold that needs rest. The kind of illness that resolves given warmth and food and time. It is not equipped for what sweeps through places where 200 people share cramped quarters, eat just enough to maintain function, and breathe the same air for months. Thomas's cough had been getting worse for 2 weeks. You'd noticed because you worked near him. You had tracked the frequency increasing, the sound deepening, the way he'd begun to brace himself against the bench with one hand when a fit came on, bracing as though against weather. A man in his 60s with a chest condition in the cold and damp of an English March, in a stone building with insufficient ventilation, on 6 ounces of gruel and 2 ounces of bread. He'll recover, you told yourself. He was a bricklayer. He's strong. The spike went in. The rope gave way. You worked. Dinner. Today is not a meat day. 3 days a week there is meat, or rather, something they call meat. The contract goes to whoever bids lowest, and the lowest bidder provides accordingly. You have eaten things in 6 weeks that you have decided as policy not to examine too closely. The texture of Wednesday's portion was an education in how far the concept of mutton can be stretched. Today is soup. The soup is a step above gruel in that it contains identifiable pieces of something root-shaped, beige, cooked to a softness that has passed softness and approached dissolution. The liquid is brown. It has a smell. Something was once cooked here, something with onion in it, and there are bones contributing a faint ghost of meat. But the smell is the memory of an intention rather than the thing itself. 6 ounces of soup, 3 ounces of bread. You eat. You're hungry constantly in this place. Not dramatically hungry. Not the stagey, cinematic hunger of someone making a point. A steady, constant background hunger that never fully resolves. After meals it retreats for an hour, maybe 2. By mid-afternoon it is back. By evening it is emphatic. You have learned to distribute the hunger across the day by eating slowly, by not thinking about it directly, by working at a pace that doesn't require your body to draw on reserves it doesn't have. You have lost weight. You can tell because the uniform jacket, which never fit properly, now fits even less. The shoulder seams drift. The buttons close more easily than they did in January. Old Thomas gets a larger portion than usual. Extra rations for the infirmary, Dr. Halstead's instruction. But Thomas is not at the table. You think about your mother. She was a practical cook, not fancy. Nobody in Stanek was fancy, but competent in ways that mattered. She could take a halfpenny's worth of bones and produce something that filled a room with smell and left you full and warm for a whole evening. She kept herbs in small clay pots on the window-sill. The kitchen always smelled of something growing, something green, alongside the wood smoke and the smell of bread. You do not think about your mother much as a rule. It is not useful. But the soup today is a particular kind of nothing, and sometimes nothing opens a door you'd rather keep shut. You shut the door. You eat. There is a moment every day, usually mid-afternoon, around 2 o'clock, when the main gate opens. The gate on Harker Street. Iron, 12 feet high, spikes along the top. It opens for deliveries. The contractor's cart with the week's flour and oatmeal. the stone load for the breaking yard, occasional visits from the Board of Guardians, who come in their coats and hats and walk the wards and go away again. When it opens, you can see through. Not much, a sliver. Depending on where you're standing in the yard, you can position yourself. Not obviously, not in a way that draws Pierce's attention, but enough to see Harker Street. Just a street, cobbled, a row of terraced houses opposite, 2 stories, ordinary brown brick. Sometimes a cart passes, sometimes a woman with a basket, sometimes a dog investigating something at the base of the opposite wall. Once 3 boys playing with a stick and a hoop, weaving between each other, shouting the particular. Noise of boys with something to chase and know where they have to be. The sound carried through the gate before it swung shut. You watched until the gate closed. Then you looked at your boots and went back to work. This is the elevated view of the poorhouse experience. Not a hill with a panorama, not a cityscape spread out below you like an empire made visible. The view from inside a poorhouse is through a gap in a gate at street level, watching ordinary life proceed without you. The merchants in the reference books, the apprentices learning their trades, the young men discovering London from horseback or river or rooftop. They looked out at the world and felt themselves to be small parts of something enormous and turning. You stand in the yard at Merton Union Workhouse and look through a gap in an iron gate at 3 boys playing with a hoop, and you feel what happens when that view goes in reverse. Not yourself, small, and the world large and meaningful, but yourself, absent, excised, removed from a world that is proceeding with complete indifference to whether you exist. The boys did not know you were watching. Nobody outside knew you were watching. You were number 247, and Harker Street moved forward. Let me give you one number before we continue. In 1847, the year you are living in, there were approximately 1,000 workhouses in England and Wales. Combined population on any given night, 150,000 people. 150,000 people behind gates like this one, behind doors locked from the outside at 9 p.m, eating 6 ounces, wearing grey. Extend the geography. Add the French Dépôt de Mendicité, the German Arbeitshäuser, the Dutch institutions, the Irish workhouses during the famine, which were a category of suffering distinct enough that they require their own sentence, their own pause. The Irish workhouses in 1847 were receiving people in a state that defied the mathematics of the system, people for whom less eligibility was a phrase without meaning because outside the gates was starvation, in the literal clinical sense, and inside was merely insufficient food and cold and degradation, which was comparatively preferable, which was not something the architects of the system had intended to create. Across Europe, on any given night in the mid-19th century, somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 people were living in institutions of this kind. 300,000 to 500,000, and they left behind bowls, spikes, keys, ledgers, coarse grey cloth, labelled everyday artefacts now. Everyday. Yes, that's exactly the right word. It happens on a Friday. 5 weeks in, the first Friday of the month is inspection day. The Board of Guardians, the committee of local property owners and tradesmen legally responsible for the workhouse, comes in through the main gate with the master, Mr. Granger. They walk the wards. They examine the dormitories, the kitchen, the workshop. They receive reports. They make notes. They do not typically speak to inmates. They speak about inmates to the master. Are the beds being properly made? Is the workshop meeting production targets? What is the current population count? Population 217 as of this morning, down from 230 last month. Some discharges and 3 deaths in the infirmary since February, duly noted. 3 deaths. One of the guardians makes a note. You're standing at your bench when the inspection comes through the workshop. 6 men in good coats following Mr. Granger, stepping carefully to avoid the oakum dust that has accumulated on the floor near the benches. One is fat and red-faced, likely a tradesman. One is an older man with the narrow black coat of a clergyman. One is younger than the rest, 30 maybe, with a thin face and eyes that move around the room differently from the others. He is actually looking, not at the room as a room, at the people. His gaze moves across the benches and catches yours for a moment. You look at your rope. He says something to Mr. Granger, quiet. Mr. Granger nods and says something back. The inspection moves on. Later, after the 9 o'clock bell, after the lock, you lie in the dark and think about that look. The way his eyes were actually taking something in. The way they registered for a moment. The hands holding the rope belonged to people. You don't know who he was. You will never know. But it mattered. The being seen, even for a second, even through the bars of where you were caught. 3 weeks later, in early April, everything changed for 4 days. A cart arrived through the main gate at 11 in the morning on a Wednesday. Not the contractor's cart, a covered wagon, and behind it 2 more. They pulled into the receiving yard, and Pierce and Granger and 2 other officers went out, and you watched from the workshop window, the high windows, standing on the bench, Joseph beside you, as the people got down. Women, maybe 30 of them. Children among them, a lot of children. They moved differently from the usual admissions. You'd seen people arrive before, local people, people from Merton or the nearby villages, people who arrived thin and frightened but still upright in their own way. These women moved like people carrying something invisible and very heavy. Some of them had children clinging to their skirts, and they were all thin in a way that was different from the thin of your ward, the 6 weeks of gruel thin. They were thin in their faces in a way that suggested something ongoing and longer than 6 weeks. Irish, Joseph said, beside you. You had heard. Everyone had heard, even here. You received information through strange channels in the workhouse, through the occasional news sheet that circulated through wards somehow, through the rare conversations with people being discharged, through the board's comments overheard from the workshop. The news from Ireland had been filtering through all winter. The potato crop had failed in 1845 and again in 1846. There were places in the west of Ireland where people had been eating grass. There were parishes where the workhouses had been built to hold 500 and were holding 2,000, and the food had run out and the fever had come in behind the hunger. Hundreds of thousands of people had left on ships for England, for America, for anywhere. These women had come to Merton. The rules required their separation from the men on admission. This was done. They were taken to the women's wing. You didn't see them again, but you heard, through channels, things. Mrs. Carr told someone, and someone told Edward, and Edward, in one of his rare moments of speech, told you that several of the women had children who had not survived the crossing from Liverpool, that 3 of the women were already in the infirmary with something that might be typhus, that the children, all of them, were placed in the children's ward, separated from their mothers on admission because the rules required separation, and that the sound of this, the the sound of children being separated from mothers who had already lost everything, was not something that Mrs. Carr, who had been a workhouse monitor for 7 years and had seen considerable things, had been able to easily describe. "What did she say?" you asked. Edward looked at you. "She said it was a sound she won't forget," he said. He went back to his rope. You went back to yours. The workhouse system in 1847 was not designed for a famine. It was designed for English poverty, the manageable, incremental poverty of people who had fallen temporarily out of work and needed a mechanism that would support them while being sufficiently unpleasant to prevent dependency. It was designed around the idea that poverty was largely a failure of individual character that could be corrected through the application of discipline and labour and discomfort. The famine in Ireland was not a failure of individual character. Into workhouses already full, into an administrative system already at its outer tolerances, into towns where the local ratepayers were already strained. Hundreds of thousands of people arrived from Ireland in 1847 alone, most of them carrying diseases incubated in the conditions of the crossing. The workhouses did what they could, which was not enough, which was in many cases catastrophic. The Irish workhouses themselves, built in the late 1830s under the same principles as the English ones, were overwhelmed on a scale that makes the word overwhelmed feel inadequate. By 1847, there were workhouses in County Clare and County Galway and County Mayo that had run out of food entirely, where the dead were buried in mass graves in the workhouse grounds because there was no other arrangement possible, where the medical officer was one man responsible for 500 sick people and was sick himself. The same tin bowl, the same grey uniform, the same locked door. But a scale of suffering that the bowl and the uniform and the locked door, multiplied across a country experiencing catastrophe, becomes something beyond the frame of the system that created them. You heard about this through fragments, over weeks. You tried to hold it alongside the knowledge of your own 6 feet by 3 feet, your own 4 pounds of oakum, your own 6 ounces. You couldn't, really. The mind doesn't scale that way. But you tried. The Monday after the inspection, Thomas came back from the infirmary. He looked better than when he left. Some colour had returned. His back was still the particular curved shape that years of bricklaying had given it, not stooped, just carrying the memory of all that weight. But he moved through the door with something more like his own volume. You didn't say anything. You don't have the language here, for I was worried. There is no transaction through which concern can be expressed between 2 men in a workhouse ward without it costs something neither of you can spare. But you moved over slightly on the bench and he sat down in his usual place, and the spike went into the rope and the morning continued. At the midday bell as you filed out, he touched your arm. "You're back," he said. He was looking at the way you were holding yourself. 6 weeks of hunching over a bench had done something to your posture that you hadn't noticed. Sit straight. Roll your shoulders back twice an hour. You do this for years the wrong way. You'll know about it. That was it. That was everything. You sat straight that afternoon. You've sat straight every afternoon since. Pierce moves you to stone breaking in mid-March. The breaking yard is in the eastern corner of the grounds. A walled enclosure with no roof, open to the sky. Large limestone slabs are delivered from quarries 2 miles east, offloaded from carts into a pile at one end. You take a hammer, 4 pounds, oak handle, and you break the stone. The process: position the stone so it presents a flat face. Place the hammerhead at an angle that will exploit the grain of the limestone. Strike. repeat. When the stone is reduced to pieces of roughly the right size, roughly the size of a large fist, they go into a pile to be collected and sold to road contractors. The hammer is heavier than you expected, not in the single swing, but in the accumulated weight of 300 swings, 500 swings, the weight that builds in your forearms over an hour, over 3 hours, over a day. The first day you did it, you thought, this is manageable. By the end of the afternoon, your arms had a fine tremor, and your palms had opened up in new places, but you get 4 extra ounces of bread, which is something, which is, in fact, a great deal. The break-in yard has sound unlike anything else in the workhouse. The ward is relatively quiet. The soft work of oakum picking, the restricted conversation, the occasional cough. The breaking yard is percussion, multiple hammers striking stone simultaneously, a continuous cracking and thudding that fills the enclosed space and reflects off the walls and enters you through your chest as much as through your ears. This smell of freshly broken limestone, something clean in it, something mineral, almost cold-smelling, cutting through the yard's usual coal and damp. 3 other men work the yard. An older man named Fletcher, who has the arms of someone who's been doing this work for years, the particular thick forearms of sustained hammer use. 2 younger men, recent arrivals from somewhere, who don't speak much. You learn the technique from watching Fletcher, the angle of the hammerhead, the way you rotate your grip slightly with each strike to reduce the impact through your wrists, the way you let the hammer's own weight do most of the work rather than forcing it, which sounds counterintuitive and is entirely correct. Fletcher doesn't offer this information. You watch and you adapt. By the end of the second week in the breaking yard, your forearms have changed. New muscle, new weight in them. Your hands have a different texture. The oakum calluses giving way to a different kind, broader, covering the whole palm. The crack of the hammer has become something you don't consciously hear anymore. The stone breaks. The pile grows. The pile is collected. Somewhere, those stones become a road. Someone walks on a road made of stone you broke in a yard you cannot leave. Every Sunday morning the chaplain comes, Reverend Whitmore, mid-50s, thin, with a face that seems to be apologizing for something, for the existence of the building he's standing in possibly, or for the gap between the promises his theology makes and the conditions in which he makes them. He reads from the Bible and delivers a short sermon in the main hall. Attendance is not optional. You sit on the bench in the main hall and listen to Reverend Whitmore stand at the front and read from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, or from the Psalms, or from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You listen to this. You eat 6 ounces of gruel 3 times a day, and you're locked in a room from 9 p.m. to 5:30 a.m., and your hands are splitting from the tar and the limestone dust, and your back aches from 6 weeks of hunching over a bench, and you're wearing a jacket with someone else's sweat worked into the wool, and you're 40 feet from Joseph's mother, and you will spend this afternoon picking oakum. Blessed are the poor in spirit. You listen to this. You're not angry exactly. Anger requires a kind of energy you don't have enough of. But you think about Reverend Whitmore's house, which is presumably a house with a door that unlocks from the inside, and you think about the 6 inches between what the theology promises and what the building delivers, and you think, someone made this. Someone made this building. Someone passed this law. Someone designed the principle of less eligibility and ran the arithmetic and decided that 6 ounces was the number, and a locked door was the right approach, and family separation was the necessary corrective mechanism. Someone, somewhere, decided. Reverend Whitmore closes his Bible. Let us pray. You bow your head. Joseph told you about Reeves the watchmaker. Ward C. The ward for the old and infirm. A man who'd been here for 3 years. 3 years. You couldn't let go of that number. You kept returning to it the way your tongue returns to a loose tooth. You saw him eventually in the yard. He was a slight man, narrow-shouldered, with the careful way of moving that comes from years of fine work. The watchmaker's habit of precision, of never quite fully committing your body weight to anything until you've checked that the surface will hold. He had pale eyes and ink-stained fingers that had probably been ink-stained before the workhouse, and were now tar-stained on top of that, the oak cum taking on the prior occupant's residue. He was feeding breadcrumbs to a pigeon that had landed on the wall of the yard. You watched him do this. He broke the bread, his allocation, or maybe a saved portion, into small pieces with his thumbnail and placed them on the wall, and the pigeon ate them, and he watched with an expression of complete concentration, like a man reading something important. You thought about his hands, the hands that had adjusted watch springs with tools finer than a hair, felt the particular resistance of a mainspring under compression, knew the difference between a movement that was right and one that was almost right by a quality of sensation in the fingertips. 3 years of picking oakum and breaking stone, 3 years of tar and limestone. Could he still do it? Could those hands still do what they were trained to do? You didn't know. You hoped so. You hoped there was something in muscle memory that was deeper than circumstance, something that persisted in the hands, regardless of what the hands had been asked to do in the interval. The pigeon finished the breadcrumbs and flew away. Reeves watched it go. Then he put his hands back in his pockets and walked slowly toward the door. You went back to work. The evening bell rings at 7. Supper, a return to the gruel. Evening gruel is slightly thicker than morning gruel, marginally in a way you had to be here several weeks to detect. The oat proportion is slightly higher. It makes no practical difference to the hunger, but you have learned to notice it, the way you learn to notice everything when variations are small enough. After supper, 1 hour of nominal free time, the yard if the weather permits, the day room if it doesn't, a room adjacent to the workshop, bare walls, benches along them, no books, no games, nothing provided, the room simply available. Men sit in the day room and do various things with their hour. Thomas mends clothing, his own, and it turns out the clothing of several others, which is not something he was asked to do, but which he has begun doing because it occupies the hands and produces something useful. Edward sits in the corner and appears to be doing nothing, which you have come to understand is the most efficient form of endurance available to him. The captain talks quietly to himself about the ship. You have, over 6 weeks, developed a practice of watching. Not obviously, not in a way anyone would identify as watching, but your eyes move around the room and you observe the specific details that the day in its busyness doesn't have room for. The way Fletcher's left hand, the non-hammer hand, has a particular stillness to it, the kind of stillness that comes from an old injury, something that healed improperly. The way the new young arrival in the far corner, a boy of 16 or 17, holds himself like he's waiting for something to hit him. The way Joseph, 3 nights running, has spent his hour with his eyes closed and his lips moving slightly, which might be prayer or might be something else. A rehearsal of something, a memory being kept alive through repetition. What are you rehearsing? What are you keeping alive? The face of your mother in the kitchen with the clay pots, the sound of your father's loom, the specific smell of the air in Stanwick in early summer, which is grass and hay and the river, and something mineral from the limestone in the soil. You rehearse these things. You repeat them in the hour before the 9 o'clock bell, like a man going over figures to make sure they haven't changed. They haven't changed yet. In your 8th week, a man named Garrett is discharged. You don't know him well. He's been in Ward A, the other men's ward. 30-something, a carpenter who had got behind on his rent and lost his tools and couldn't find steady work. He had a wife and daughter in the women's wards, and the daughter was in the children's ward, and on the morning of his discharge you watched from the yard as the 3 of them came through the receiving room door and stood in the yard for a moment. His wife had the expression of a woman who has been somewhere very bad and has just been told she can leave. The daughter, maybe 7 years old, held on to her mother's coat and watched her father with an expression that was too careful for a 7-year-old, too measured, something that had been learned in the children's ward. Garrett had his own clothes back. He looked strange in them, wrong somehow. The ordinary clothes of a carpenter on a body that had been in grey for however long he'd been here. 3 months, 4 months. He said something to his wife. She said something back. They didn't embrace. Not yet. They were still in the yard, still inside the building, still within the rules. They walked toward the gate. Pierce opened it. They walked through. The gate closed. You went back to work. The image stayed with you all day. Those 3 people walking through the gate onto Harker Street, the ordinary street. The girl's hand releasing her mother's coat the moment they were through, just slightly, just enough. That could be you, in some form, in some version. Not today, not next week, but someday. When? When something. You didn't know what. Your father recovered enough to work. You accumulated enough wages somewhere outside to rent a room. Something. Something that constituted an alternative. Somewhere. You told yourself, somewhere. That evening in the day room you sat with your eyes open and watched the wall and thought about Harker Street, and the 3 of them walking on it, and what it meant that an ordinary cobbled street with ordinary terraced houses was the object of something very close to longing. April comes, then May. The weather changes inside the workhouse in ways you hadn't expected. Not warmth, exactly, not at first, but a different quality of cold. Less the deep, penetrating cold of winter that settles into stone and doesn't leave, and more a surface cold, a night cold, something that retreats in the afternoon. The window in the ward starts to admit actual light at 5:30 instead of darkness, and the light arrives and lies across the floor in a rectangle that moves through the morning, and you track it sometimes while working. The yard smells different, something vegetative. There is a strip of ground along the south wall of the women's yard you heard from Mrs. Carr through the usual channels where the board authorised the women to plant a kitchen garden last year, and in spring the smell of turned earth comes over the wall. You cannot see it, you can smell it. Wet earth and something green just beginning. You've not smelled that in months. You stand in the yard during the free hour on a Sunday evening and face the south wall and breathe it in, and for a moment, just for a moment, before the ward bell rings and you go back in, for a moment you're not here. You're in Stanwick in a field in April and the whole year is ahead of you and nothing has happened yet. Then the bell rings, Thursday of the 3rd week in May. You need to know this thing that happens, even though knowing it costs something. Thomas has been in the infirmary for a week, returned there on a Monday after another morning where Pierce looked at his colour and made the call. This time he went without the need to be helped. He walked there himself. That was something. On Thursday, Dr. Halstead makes his rounds. You know this because you see Halstead through the workshop window as he crosses the yard. Short, broad-shouldered, carrying his bag. He goes in through the infirmary door. You pick oakum. An hour later, Mr. Granger comes to the workshop. This does not happen. The master does not come to the workshop during working hours. Granger runs the institution from his office near the front gate and communicates through Pierce. He speaks to Pierce in the doorway, low. Pierce looks up, looks toward where you're sitting, looks back at Granger, nods. Granger leaves. Pierce walks the length of the workshop and stops beside you. Ashton. You look up. Mr. Thomas, Pierce says. He doesn't look at you directly. He looks at a point slightly to the left of your face. He's asking for you. You set down the spike. You follow Pierce out of the workshop and down the corridor, and the smell changes as you approach the infirmary. Carbolic, linseed, the other smell you've learned to recognise without being able to name it. And Pierce opens the door and goes in ahead of you, and you step through. 10 beds, 5 occupied. Thomas is in the third one on the left. He looks better than the first time, less grey, but smaller. That is the persistent word. He looks smaller than a man his size and history should look, like the volume is continuing its slow departure. Pierce stays near the door. You go to the bed. You pull the stool from beside the next bed and sit. Thomas looks at you. His eyes are still the same, dark brown, sharp, the eyes of a man who spent 40 years reading mortar joints and checking angles by sight, eyes trained in precision. He doesn't say anything for a moment. You're staying straight, he says. You realise you are. Back straight, shoulders back. Yes, you say. He nods. Then, where are you from? You tell him. Stanwick, the Weaver, the Mills, January. He listens. His breathing is a sound you're aware of, not laboured but present, an effortful steadiness. Cheshire, he says. Originally, long time ago, a pause. 40 years bricklaying. Good work. Honest work. Was. He doesn't say was, but you hear it. You'll go back to work, you say. It comes out wrong. Too certain. The wrong kind of certainty. He looks at you again with those precise eyes. Maybe, he says, and maybe not. He's not asking for comfort. He's not offering it either. He's just making a statement about the reality of his situation, with the matter-of-factness of a man who spent 4 decades laying true courses in lime mortar. This is what is. This is the angle. This is what the level shows. You sit with him for the time Pierce allows, which is 15 minutes. At the door, you look back. Thomas has closed his eyes. His hands are on the blanket, flat. The bricklayer's hands, wide and worn, lying still. The next morning the infirmary bed is empty. The morning after that his name in the ledger has a line through it. Mr. Fennick makes a new entry in a different register. It has a date. It has a cause, which is listed as chest fever. It does not list 40 years of bricklaying or a back that remembers the weight of 1,000 loads or hands that were precise enough to feel a variation of 1/8 of an inch in a course of stone. The spike goes into the rope. The fibres separate. 4 pounds. Exactly 4 pounds. In June, a visitor comes. Not the board, not the regular inspection. A visitor to a specific inmate. A woman. A relative. some connection established through letters or through word carried by someone who was discharged and travelled the 8 miles between here and there. This happens occasionally and is administered strictly. The visiting room, 2 of you seated across a table, a monitor present, 30 minutes. You know about this because Joseph has a visitor, his father, the sick father from the village 20 miles east, the man who sent his family here because there was nothing else. He has recovered enough, or has decided to walk regardless of recovery, and he's come to Merton on a Wednesday afternoon and asked at the gate to see his son. They give him 30 minutes. Joseph comes out of the visiting room with his eyes very bright in a way you recognise as the opposite of crying, the way people hold themselves precisely to not cry. He goes to the bench. He picks up the spike. He works with his head down for an hour in complete silence. At the midday bell, you walk beside him to the hall. He looks better, you ask. Joseph nods, one nod, short, you nod back. That evening, after supper in the day room, Joseph tells you, in the corner, near the wall, in the 10-minute window before the 9 o'clock bell, that his father has found work, a mill in Merton. Not good work, not skilled work, nothing that fits what his father was trained to do, but work, money, a room rented in a court off Harker Street, the same street the workhouse gate opens onto, a different world happening 100 yards away. Enough for discharge, maybe not immediately, maybe in a month, maybe 2. But enough that there is a when. When you go, you say, tell me what the street looks like. Joseph looks at you. I'll tell you, he says. I'll send word somehow. The 9 o'clock bell rings. You go to bed. Entry 247. Will Ashton. June 1847. Still present. You have been here nearly 5 months. Your hands have adapted completely. The tar no longer bleeds into the nail cuts because the cuts have sealed into callus. The callus on your palms is layered. Oakum, then stone breaking, a different texture, a different hardness. Your back is straight from Thomas's instruction. Your arms are heavier than they were in January. In January you were a weaver's son from Stanwick. You weighed what a weaver's son from Stanwick weighed. You moved the way a young man from a village moves. You knew what a young man from a village knows. What are you now? The question doesn't have an obvious answer. You are stronger. You are more efficient at tasks that are useless outside this building. You know the specific internal geography of the Merton Union workhouse. The floorboard on the 3rd step that shifts under weight. The window in the north dormitory that can be opened silently if you lift it at an angle. The time of day when Pierce goes to his meal and the workshop is unsupervised for 7 minutes. You know when to talk and when not to. You know which of the monitors is lenient and which isn't, and what each of them needs to see from you in order to leave you alone. You know that Dr. Halstead's Tuesday visits are more thorough than his Friday ones. You know that the contractor delivers on Mondays and the flour is fresher on Mondays and Tuesdays than it is by Friday. You know things that are only useful here. What happens when you leave? If you leave? What do you do with a body trained for stone breaking and a mind specialised in the logistics of institutional survival? You think about Reeves and his watchmaker's hands. 3 years. You think about Thomas and his straight courses of brick. You think about Joseph's father in a mill in Merton, in a room off Harker Street, working something that doesn't fit what he was made to do, but working nonetheless. You press the spike into the rope. The rope gives. You work. July is hot inside stone walls in a way that is its own specific punishment. The ward at night becomes a different kind of place. The cold is gone, but the heat is enclosed, trapped, 60 bodies generating warmth in a sealed room, and what replaced the stinging cold of winter is a dense, clinging warmth that sits on your chest and makes sleep reluctant. You lie on top of the blanket instead of under it. The straw mattress releases a particular smell in the heat, something vegetable, something that has been in contact with 100 sleeping bodies and holds a record of each of them. The windows in the ward are open during the day for the first time since October. Fresh air entering is startling in a way you hadn't anticipated. Not fresh in any absolute sense. This is still the Merton Union workhouse, still stone and oakum and coal smoke and close quarters, but different air, air that has been somewhere else, air that carries at certain hours the smell of the street, horse, coal, cooking from somewhere, occasional traces of the garden on the south wall. In July, the garden smell becomes identifiable as actual vegetables. Something is growing over there that you will never see and probably never eat, but can sometimes smell on the evening air, and the smell is tomatoes and warm earth and growth, which is a smell that belongs to the world that goes on outside this building. You smell it through the window and you do not think anything in particular. You just breathe it. In August, a letter arrives. The post is delivered to the receiving office and distributed by Mr. Fenwick. Most inmates receive no letters. The economics of letter writing require a correspondent who is literate, who has access to paper and pen, who has a penny for the stamp, and most of the people who know the people inside this building don't have all three at once. Your name is called. You go to the receiving office. Mr. Fenwick slides a folded letter across the counter without looking up. The handwriting on the outside is your sister's. You recognise it from years ago. Careful, slightly laboured, the handwriting of someone who learned late and worked at it. Charlotte, Bradford. Your hands, which have been steady and competent for months now, are not steady as you open it. She is well. She is working in a household in Bradford, a decent place, she says, which probably means a place where the requirements are excessive and the compensation is not, but which is at least regular. She has been saving. She has been sending half her wages to your father in Stanwick, who is, she writes this carefully, measuring each word, somewhat improved but not restored. The tremor is less. He is working again, a little. Not the loom, something else. She does not specify. Your younger brother William is with the aunt and doing well. He has found work as a delivery boy. He is 12. She asks, "Are you all right?" You sit in the yard with the letter open on your knee and read this question several times. Are you all right? You think about how to answer it. You are alive. You are not sick. You are stronger than you were. You eat 6 ounces 3 times a day and sleep on a straw mattress and wake to a 5:30 bolt and pick oakum and break stone and count the days without quite allowing yourself to count them. You are all right in the specific, narrow sense that nothing has ended you. You write back. You borrow pen and paper from Fenwick. He allows this. It is regulation. You have the right to correspond. And you sit at the bench in the day room and write. I am well. The work is steady. I think of you often. Keep saving. When there is something I will write again. You do not describe the bowl. You do not describe the 5:30 bolt. You do not describe Thomas or the infirmary bed with the line through it in the ledger, or the 3 boys playing with a hoop on Harker Street, or the smell of the women's garden on the south wall. You fold the letter. You hand it to Fenwick with a penny from the week's small allowance. You go back to work. There is a question that is never asked in the Merton Union workhouse, which is, How are you? This is not a social convention gap. It is not rudeness. It is the logic of the place made explicit. The question has only one answer available inside these walls, and everyone knows what it is, and asking it serves no function except to confirm a truth that the asking is designed to momentarily deny. "Are you all right?" Charlotte asks from Bradford. "Are you all right?" the system asks, translated into gruel and uniform and locked doors. You are not all right. That is why you are here. Your not being all right will be remedied, or it will persist. Either way, you will behave as directed. What you learn in a poorhouse, not the lesson they intend, not the character-building moral instruction about the virtue of labour and the cost of dependency, but what you actually learn, what settles into you at a cellular level over weeks and months of 530 bolts and tin bowls, how small the requirements of the body actually are, how little you genuinely need, how adaptable the human organism is to conditions it has decided in some deep layer of itself are simply what existence is, and how much of ordinary life is not necessity but surplus, not need but richness, the warmth of a fire that isn't rationed by committee, a meal you chose, a door you can open from the inside, the absence of a bell telling you when to sleep. You will not know this until you leave. You will not be able to feel the full weight of it until you are standing on Harker Street outside that gate with your own clothes back on your body. But it is building in you now, in ways you don't yet have words for. September, 8 months, your father writes. Not in his own hand. A neighbour with more letters takes dictation. But the words are his. The tremor has improved enough to do light work. He's employed as yard labourer at a wool merchant's in Stanwick at 8 shillings a week, which is less than a weaver's wage, less than what the family needs to fully reconstitute itself, but more than nothing. He has the cottage still. He has arranged the front room, the room with the loom, to include a small parlour area. The loom remains. He can't bring himself to break it. He would like you to come home. Come home. 2 words that contain 8 months of their absence. You give the 24 hours notice to Mr. Fenwick. You write it in the register. The line next to entry 247 receives a date. The morning of your last day in the Merton Union workhouse, you wake at 5:30 to the bolt and the door and pierces up, and you dress in the uniform for the last time, and you go through the routine that your body has done so many hundred times it performs itself. Washing, breakfast, hall, 6 ounces of gruel. You eat it slowly. You make it last the full 20 minutes. You think about the bowl, the dent in the side, the chipped enamel. This particular bowl has been in use since when? The workhouse opened in 1836. 13 years of people eating 6 ounces from this bowl 3 times a day, hands wrapping around it for the warmth it contains. Some of those people left. Some of them died in the infirmary. Some of them perhaps are still here. You set it down. You do not go to the workshop that morning. Discharged inmates spend the morning in the day room until the paperwork is prepared. You sit in the day room. The captain is there, in his corner, talking quietly to the ship. Edward is there, hands folded, eyes in the middle distance. A new man is there, arrived last week, who looks at everything with the particular overwhelmed alertness of someone who's just had their name become a number. You look at him, he looks at you. It gets easier, you say. He says nothing. He doesn't believe you. You can hear it in his silence. But he will. Eventually. At noon, Fenwick calls you to the receiving office. Your clothes are on the counter, folded. Someone has folded them, which is more than you expected. Your jacket, your trousers, the shirt, your boots, everything where you left it 8 months ago in January on a grey Tuesday morning that feels like it happened in a different life. You change in the small room with the bench and the hook. The wool jacket smells of cedar and old cloth and something unmistakably your own, a smell you had forgotten that you had. You put it on. The elbows are still worn through. The lining has a torn section at the hem you remember meaning to fix. You button it up. You're no longer 247. Fenwick has the ledger open. Entry 247. He writes the date of discharge. He writes the reason. Circumstances improved. He slides a receipt across the counter. A receipt for the return of your property. You sign it. You pick up your boots. You walk down the corridor, through the receiving room, out the front door, across the receiving yard to the main gate. Pierce is at the gate. He has the key. That small iron key, the one in the museum case. He unlocks the gate. He opens it. He says nothing. You walk through onto Harker Street. You stand on the cobbles for a moment. The gate closes behind you. The click of the lock. From outside now, Harker Street. Just a street. Just cobbles and terraced houses and a cart going by at the far end. And a woman hanging something from an upper window, and a smell of coal smoke and horse and autumn. You look at it. You look at it for a long time. The boys with the hoop are not here today. Just the ordinary afternoon of a street in Merton in September, 1847, which looks like nothing, which is everything. You start walking. Your boots on the cobbles make a sound that is your sound, that belongs to you, that doesn't ring against stone walls but opens out into the open air and goes where you go and stops when you stop. 8 miles to Stanwick. You know how to walk 8 miles. You have walked 8 miles before, going the other direction, in January, wearing these same boots. You start. The road out of Merton goes north, then northwest, through a village called Hather, then across open fields for 3 miles, then into the territory that starts to feel like home in ways that have nothing to do with its quality and everything to do with its familiarity. The air is different outside the town. Less coal, less people smell, more grass, more turned earth, the particular autumn smell of leaves beginning their slow dissolution. You breathe it in. You breathe it in and breathe it in and breathe it in. Your feet find the familiar irregularities of the road, the place where a cartwheel has cut a permanent groove, the section where the road rises slightly over a buried boulder, the long flat stretch near the 2nd-mile marker, where you always used to run as a boy because the running felt like flying, felt like the world was going exactly as fast as you needed it to. You don't run now. Your legs know the distance and pace themselves without being asked. You walk, you're going home, and you think about the bowl. This is what I want you to think about in the dark before you sleep. The tin porringer in the museum case is dented on one side from being dropped. The enamel is chipped. Someone's hands wore the glaze on the rim. Someone's spoon left scratches in the interior. That bowl held hundreds of portions of gruel. Thousands, maybe. 6 ounces. 3 times a day. How many people? How many years? The museum label says everyday artifact. Every day. That's the key. Not the extraordinary. Not the dramatic event. Not the execution or the riot or the disaster. Every day. The routine machinery of an ordinary morning in an institution that held 150,000 people. across 1,000 buildings and served them 6 ounces from a bowl like this one, and locked the door behind them at 9 p.m. and rang the bell at 5:30 and called it, with the specific confidence of a system that had decided what it was doing was right, called it relief of the poor. The poor, relieved. Numbers assigned to names. Families divided. Skills made irrelevant. The watchmaker's hands, the bricklayer's knowledge of mortar, the weaver's understanding of thread and tension, all of it reduced to the same task. Pull the rope apart, break the stone, hold the bowl. The people who designed this system genuinely believed in it. That's important to hold. They were not, in their own accounting, cruel. They were rational. They had decided on a mechanism, and they implemented it with the thoroughness that rationality applied to human suffering can produce, which is a very specific thoroughness, the thoroughness of people who have decided that the difficulty people are experiencing is a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be witnessed. And across Europe, across the decades of the 19th century, into the 20th, into a different shape of the same logic, the same rationality applied to the same human difficulty, with different names and different countries and different languages and the same grey walls and the same locked door. Same bowl, different hands. You want to know before you sleep. You make it back to Stanwick. Your father is at the door of the cottage when you come up the lane, as though he knew what time you would arrive, which he couldn't have known, but which is the way fathers sometimes are. He is thinner than he was, and he moves carefully, the tremor still present in his right hand, but manageable, something he has learned to work around. He doesn't say anything for a moment. You don't either. Then he steps back and lets you into the cottage, and you go in, and the loom is there in the front room, and the herb pots are on the windowsill. Different plants now, colder month. But there, clay and soil and something small and growing. Your father makes tea. It is November 1847. You're 20 years old. You have been in the world for 20 years and you know certain things that you did not know before January. You know how small the body's requirements actually are. You know what a human being looks like when they've been reduced to a number in a ledger. You know what the spike feels like in the hand after 10,000 uses. You know that a wooden spoon with a number scratched in the handle is not just a spoon. You know that something called everyday is not the same as something called small. And now you know too, you who are reading this in the dark, or listening to this in the comfortable specific darkness of wherever you're sleeping tonight, you in your warm room, your adequate food, your door that unlocks from the inside. You know about the bowl, you know about the spike, you know about the gate on Harker Street, and the 3 boys playing with a hoop, and the sound of it carrying through the iron before it swung shut. These objects are in a museum case somewhere. A tin bowl, a wooden spike, a rough grey cloth, a small iron key, a ledger. Everyday artefacts. That's what the label says. Every day. That is exactly right. Every day for decades, in 1,000 buildings, 500,000 hands. Every day the 5:30 bell and the 6 ounces in the locked door. Every day also something else. The hand signal across a workshop meaning, slow down, pace yourself. The old man dividing his bread in 2 with the precision of someone measuring mortar. The thin boy's voice singing something through the wall of the adjacent yard. 30 seconds before someone stopped it. The pigeon eating from a watchmaker's hand. The letter from Bradford. Are you all right? Every day contains both of these things. That's the weight of it. That's why the objects are in the case, not because they're beautiful, not because they're particularly old, because they are the residue of what people live through, and what people live through daily for decades was the specific experience of being made smaller than you were by a system that had decided smallness was the mechanism of your improvement. And people survived it. Not all of them. The ledgers have the lines through names, the infirmary beds empty in the morning, the entries under cause of death that list chest fever and general debility, and the particular cruelty of old age listed as a cause of death for a man of 62. Not all of them survived, but most of them did. They adapted in ways that required real courage to call adaptation rather than surrender. They found the forms of communication available to them, the hand signals, the divided bread, the 30 seconds of singing, and they used them. They were people. That seems obvious and is not obvious enough. They were people with particular skills and particular histories and particular loves, and the particular ache of particular absences. They were a watchmaker with ink-stained fingers, a bricklayer who knew the feel of a true course, a weaver's son who learned to sit straight. They ate 6 ounces of gruel from a tin bowl, 3 times a day, in 1,000 buildings, for decades, and now you know. You're nearly asleep now. I can tell from the way the world has gone quiet around you. The way this voice is the only thing still moving. Let it move. Let it carry you the last distance. Will Ashton is walking home from Stanwick in some version of 1847 that is also always somehow right now, because these things don't date in the way we imagine they date. The bowl is in the museum case. The spike is in the museum case. But Will Ashton's hands are carrying them still in the way that hands carry the memory of what they have held. You are not Will Ashton, but you have been him. Tonight, you have felt the cold shoot through the soles of his boots. You have smelled the ward in those first seconds of waking when the nose has no defence. You have pressed the spike into the rope and heard the dry creak as the fibres let go. You have sat with Thomas in the infirmary and watched his precise eyes. You have stood at the gate on Harker Street and watched 3 boys with a hoop and heard the sound of it carry through the iron before it swung shut. You have carried all of this. Now put it down. You don't need to carry it. That was always the point. Not to carry it for them. They carried it enough, but to know it. To know it was there. To let the knowledge of it change, very slightly, the weight of your own ordinary things. Your door that opens from the inside. Your bowl that holds more than 6 ounces. The particular darkness of your own room, which is your room, which has your smell and your shape in it, which is the specific size of your life and not a number in a ledger. Let the sounds of wherever you are come back in now. The house settling, the street, if there is a street, the breathing of whoever else is in the world with you tonight. These are good sounds. These are the sounds of ordinary life proceeding. They were not ordinary once. They are not ordinary, actually, if you look at them from the right angle. From the angle of Harker Street through a gap in the gate. But they are yours. That is enough. That is enough. The workhouses in England were formally abolished in 1930 under the Local Government Act. The buildings remained. Many became hospitals, care homes, council offices, apartment buildings. You can still find them if you know what to look for. A certain scale of Victorian institutional brick, a certain proportioned grimness, a certain blank functionality in the fenestration. A building designed not to comfort but to process. Some of them have plaques now. This building served as the parish workhouse from 1836 to 1930. a plaque that covers the thing it describes in the same gesture as marking it. The objects ended up in museums, the bowl, the spike, the key, the ledger, everyday artifacts, every day. Your breathing is slowing now. I can hear it in the way you're listening. The particular quality of attention that is almost not attention, the state where the words come in but stop before they mean anything particular, stop at the level of sound and rhythm. Good, stay there. The world outside is doing whatever the world outside does at this hour. It is doing it without requiring anything from you. Everything that needs doing tonight is already done. There is nothing to tend to, nothing to watch, nothing that will be different in the morning, for you're watching it now. You are warm enough, you are fed enough, you are safe enough. This room is yours, and the door opens from the inside, and nobody will ring a bell at 5:30 and require you to be upright before you're ready. You have this. Take it. Let the thoughts slow and lose their edges. Let the images, the bowl, the gate, the thin boy's voice through the wall, let them soften into something that is not thinking, but is adjacent to it, the texture of a thing absorbed. You know about the bowl now. That's enough. That's all I needed you to know. Somewhere, in the county records of a dozen English towns, in the archives of institutions across France and Germany and the Netherlands, in the ledgers that survived the demolitions and the relocations and the administrative recategorizations of a century of change, somewhere in all of that, there are hundreds of thousands of names, names with numbers beside them, dates of entry and dates of discharge and dates of death. They were everyday people who carried everyday objects. The objects are in cases. The people are in us, a little, now, in the way we hold a bowl, in the way we move through a door, in the small, unconscious gratitude the body holds for warmth it was not promised and has received. Before we go further into sleep, let me tell you about two more objects, still in the museum, still behind glass. The first one is easy to miss. It sits in the corner of the case, partially behind the ledger, a small cylinder of iron about the length of a thumb, with a hole through the centre, worn smooth on the exterior, slightly deformed on one end like something struck it repeatedly. The label reads, Tally Counter, Workhouse Manufacture, circa 1845. A tally counter. The monitor would use it to keep track of the oakum weighed. Click. £4. Click. Another £4. Each click a person, each person a production figure, each production figure an entry in the ledger. Click. 247, £4, adequate. Click. 238, £3 7 ounces, below quota. Mark it. The counter has been used so many times that the mechanism is slightly loose now. You can hear it when you pick it up, apparently. A faint rattle, the click not quite crisp anymore, the precision of the mechanism worn down by repetition. 10,000 bodies reduced to clicks. The second object is the one that stayed with me longest when I read about this exhibition. It is in a different case, slightly to the left of the main display. It is a small wooden bird, hand-carved, rough, clearly not made by a craftsman, not made with proper tools, made with what was available, a piece of scavenged wood, probably a piece of the workhouse furniture, that had broken off, shaped with a nail or a piece of sharp stone. The wings are suggested rather than detailed. The head is a rounded knob. The feet are two carved lines. The label reads, Carved figure, origin unknown, found during 1970 renovation of former workhouse building Merton, Yorkshire. They found it in a wall, not on a shelf, not in a drawer, in a wall. In a gap between two courses of stonework in the old men's dormitory, Ward B, the wall adjacent to the boys' yard, someone carved a wooden bird out of whatever they could find and hid it in a wall. Not hidden to be retrieved later, hidden permanently, hidden in the wall between the men's ward and the boys' yard. A bird that could fly between them. I have been thinking about that bird since I started writing this story, about the hands that made it, the careful, patient work of shaping something with inadequate tools, the specific concentration of someone who had decided that making this thing mattered, even though nothing about the system around them was designed to permit things to matter. The museum label says origin unknown. I think I know the origin. I think I know whose hands those were. Edward has not spoken much. I should tell you more about Edward. In the 6 months you've been in Ward B, Edward has contributed to the collective conversation of the ward approximately 40 words. You have counted. Not deliberately, as it is simply the kind of accounting that happens when time is measured in bells, and you're paying attention to things because paying attention to things is the available alternative to not. 40 words. Maybe 45. He's the size of a man who was once larger. That is how to say it. The frame of him suggests a bigger person. The width of his shoulders, the length of his hands, the way he holds himself when he stands, which is upright, not curved, not defensive. He was once a man who occupied his full space. Now he occupies less than that. Not because he has stooped or broken, but because something has been redirected inward and is being spent on a purpose you cannot see. You have gathered what you can. His name is Edward Collier. He was a carpenter. Good one. The kind of carpenter people hired by reputation. The kind who had a regular set of clients and kept a small workshop with his own tools, which is a significant thing to own your tools. A carpenter who owns his tools is a craftsman. A carpenter who does not is a labourer. The difference is considerable. He owned his tools until 1846, when the combination of a slow year and a debt and a landlord who was not inclined to patience removed the tools, the workshop, the regularity, and the space between him and the workhouse gate. He arrived in November, the same month as his nephew Samuel. Samuel is 9. He is in the boys' ward, which shares a wall with the men's dormitory. Ward B, North Wall. You have been in Ward B for 8 months, and you have never once seen Edward look at that wall. His eyes move everywhere in a controlled, deliberate way. The bench, the rope, Pierce's position, the window, the yard, but not the north wall. Never the north wall. It is a Thursday in October. You have been in the Merton Union Workhouse for 9 months. The morning has been cold, the kind of cold that means November is testing its reach, finding out how much ground it can take in advance. The day's work is done. The evening bell has rung. You're in the day room. Edward is in the corner. You've been watching him for 20 minutes with the patience you have developed, the patience that comes from having had months to do nothing but develop it. He is doing something with his hands. He is not mending the way Thomas mended. He is not praying the way Joseph prays. He is moving his hands in a small, contained way. His left hand steady on his knee, his right hand moving above it in a motion that is precise and repetitive. Measuring. He's measuring something invisible, checking a length, checking it again. He does this for 10 minutes. Then he stops. He looks at the wall, not the north wall, the east wall. He's looking at the east wall with the attention of a man solving a specific practical problem. Then he looks down at his hands again. He sees you watching. You look away. Too late. A silence. Oak, he says. You look back. What? Oak, he says again. Workbench. Good one. About 10 feet, 4-inch top. He's looking at the east wall. I keep seeing it. Every time I close my eyes. The workshop I had. I keep measuring it. He says this without inflection. Not sad, not seeking comfort, just stating a fact the way Thomas stated facts, with the precision of a man whose entire professional life was spent in the discipline of accuracy. How long did you have it, you say? 11 years. 11 years is a life. 11 years is a son who grows from infancy to adolescence, while a man works in the same workshop with the same tools, and builds a reputation and accumulates the particular knowledge that comes from 11 years of the same craft. What kind of work, you ask? Furniture, mainly. Later on, some building work, the joinery, window frames, door casings. I did a set of stairs for a house on Chester Road. Winding staircase, mahogany rail. Took 3 weeks. He looks at the wall. Still there, probably. You think about a set of stairs on Chester Road in Merton, mahogany rail still in place, while the man who built them picks oakum in a building 2 miles away. I keep thinking about the tools, Edward says, what state they're in, whether whoever has them knows how to care for them, whether the planes have been properly stored. He pauses. Planes need to be stored on their sides, the blade off the surface, otherwise the blade dulls. You nod. Silly thing to worry about, he says. Not silly, you say. He looks at you. No, he says. Not silly. He is quiet for a moment. Then, Samuel is doing all right. Mrs. Carr told the monitor's wife, and the monitor's wife told Pierce, and Pierce told me in a way that I think he thought he was being careful not to tell me. But I understood it. He looks at his hands. He's doing all right. You don't say that's good because it is manifestly not entirely good, and you both know it. A 9-year-old boy is all right in a ward separated from his uncle by 40 feet of stone wall. All right is doing a lot of work in that sentence, but it is something. It is what is available. Oak, Edward says again quietly, and he begins measuring the invisible workbench again, his hands moving with the same precision they brought to window frames and door casings, and a winding staircase with a mahogany rail, somewhere on Chester Road. The cold comes back in the last week of October, not gradually, not with the incremental retreat of warmth that September performs, leaving you able to pretend each day that tomorrow will be warmer. The cold comes back in one night, definitively, the temperature dropping while you sleep so that you wake at 5:30, and the ward has a chill in it that belongs to a different season. Ice on the basin again. You break it with your fist. The same motion you performed in January. The skin of your knuckle remembers the impact. We're back. Your body does not renegotiate with this. It doesn't argue. It simply reloads the programs from winter, the strategies for managing cold, the way you move through it, the clothes layered as much as the uniform allows, the way you hold yourself slightly turned from drafts. 9 months. 9 months of bells and bowls and bolts, and this morning feels like the first morning. The same cold and the same stone and the same uniform jacket that does not fit. Except it is not the same morning. You know that even if you can't always feel it. You're not the person who arrived in January. That person did not know how to pick oakum without bleeding, did not know Thomas's rule about posture or Pierce's blind spot at 11:45 or the right angle to hold the spike on old tarred rope versus new, did not know to eat the bread in 4 bites, not 1, did not know about the gap in the gate on Harker Street or the smell of the women's garden coming over the south wall in summer. You know these things now. They are not nothing. They are not what you came here to learn. But they are what was available to be learned, and you learned it with the same thoroughness you brought to everything else. Because learning is what the mind does when it is given time and stimulation, and the mind has nothing but time and the stimulation of close quarters, and the necessity of paying attention to a world reduced to 40 feet square. 9 months, the ice breaks, the water is cold, you wash your face. Let me tell you something about sleep in the workhouse, because it is one of the things that doesn't appear in the records and belongs to this story. Sleep is the only place the system cannot follow you. That's how you understand it. Lying in the dark in October, 9 months in, listening to the breathing of 8 other men. The rules govern the waking hours completely. Bell to bell to bell. Eat what you're given when the bell says. Work where you're directed. Move in the spaces allocated. Speak when permitted. Be where you're required. But in sleep, in the gap between the 9 o'clock bell and the 5:30 bolt, there is no monitor, no quota, no grey jacket with a number sewn to the breast pocket. In sleep, you are Will Ashton from Stanwick, and the geography is different, and the rules are different, and the people you love are present in whatever form dreams allow them to be present. You dream about your mother's kitchen. You dream about the village in summer, the particular quality of light in the late afternoons when the whole world seems to be made of warm gold. You dream about your father's loom, the specific rhythm of it, the way the shed opens and closes, the precise percussion of the batten, sounds that were the background of your entire childhood and that you only notice now through their absence. You dream about the road to Merton, walking it in the other direction. You dream sometimes about nothing in particular, just warmth and space and the pleasant absence of bells. You wake to the 5:30 bolt and carry the dreams back into the day for as long as they'll stay, which is usually until breakfast, sometimes longer. The mind knows how to take what it needs. That is something to hold. Even here, even in this, the mind finds what it needs. Reverend Whitmore comes back, not to the Sunday service. He always comes to that. But on a Thursday afternoon in October, he comes to the day room. This is unusual. He walks in with his narrow, apologetic coat and his expression of contained regret. And he looks around the room, and then he does something you have never seen anyone from outside the institution do. He sits down. He sits on one of the benches, not in a chair brought from somewhere, not elevated above the room's level. He sits on the inmate's bench. He opens his Bible. He reads quietly, not to anyone in particular, not the declamatory Sunday performance, but something conversational. Just the words coming into the room, these psalms, the 23rd, which everyone knows, then something from the Beatitudes, then something from Ruth, whither thou goest, I will go, which in the context of a room full of people separated from everyone they came from, is either an act of extraordinary empathy or ordinary thoughtlessness. You watch his face as he reads. He knows what it is to read about family and faithfulness in a room full of people for whom family and faithfulness have been separated by the conditions of poverty and the architecture of the building he is sitting in. He reads it anyway. When he finishes, he closes the Bible. He sits for a moment. Then he says, without particular emphasis, to no one specific, "If anyone wishes to speak with me, I am here until 6. He waits. Nobody speaks. Then Edward, from the corner, says, "Is the boy all right?" The room shifts slightly, everyone listening to a question that has been waiting 9 months to be asked. Whitmore looks at Edward for a moment. "I will find out," he says. "Before next Sunday I will find out and I will tell you." Edward nods. He looks back at his hands. "Thank you," he says, in 45 words. 47 now. Whitmore nods. He opens the Bible again and reads quietly until 6 o'clock, and then he leaves, and the room remains slightly different after him. Not transformed, not redeemed, just slightly different, in the way a room is different when someone has been present in it who is actually paying attention. The following Sunday, before the service, Whitmore stops at the end of the men's pew. He says one sentence. "Samuel is well and learning his letters." He moves on. Edward does not change expression. He stares forward through the service, at the up the next morning and the workshop and the afternoon bell and the supper and the day room. But in the day room on Sunday evening he begins to carve. You don't see what he uses, something small and sharp that he has somehow kept or found or made from available material. He works with his hand cupped around the object, his body angled away from Pierce's usual sight line, in the same corner where he always sits. You watch without watching. You're learning something with a great deal of practice. He works carefully, slowly. The motion of his hands is different from the oakum picking, different from the invisible workbench measuring. It is smaller, more concentrated, the particular delicacy of someone trained in precision, applied to a scale that is almost too small for his hands. A shaving of wood falls to the floor. He grinds it into the stone with his boot. He works every evening for 2 weeks. At the end of the second week, in the day room, he catches your eye across the room. He looks at the north wall, just briefly, a glance. Then he looks back at his hands, and you understand. You don't know how he got it into the wall. You suspect Pierce knows and has decided not to know. You suspect that in the long institutional career of a workhouse monitor, a man develops categories of transgression that he enforces and categories that he permits, and the criterion for the distinction is something he would not be able to articulate, but which he has arrived at through years of proximity to the specific nature of institutional suffering. You never ask, Edward never explains, but the bird is in the wall, between the men's ward and the boys' yard, a wooden bird with rough wings and a rounded head and 2 lines for feet, carved by a carpenter's hands with a carpenter's precision and a carpenter's knowledge of what wood can and cannot do, what can be said in material and what cannot. The bird is in the wall. On the other side of the wall, a 9-year-old boy is learning his letters. The letter from Charlotte arrives in November. A second letter, not the one from August. A new one, dated the 2nd of November. The handwriting the same but faster, less careful, as though written in urgency or excitement or something that disrupted the usual deliberate formation of letters. She has found a position. Not for herself. She has a position. She is settled in Bradford in the household. For you. A man named Holsworth, who does business with the household where Charlotte works, who deals in wool trading, who has heard from Charlotte that her brother is trained as a labourer and has some experience and is in the workhouse at Merton. This man Holsworth requires a warehouse assistant at his premises on North Street, Merton. 8 shillings a week. A room available in a house kept by a woman called Mrs. Parr, 3 streets away. References required. Mr. Holsworth has spoken with the household. and Charlotte's employer has spoken for her character, which is, in the economy of domestic service, a form of currency that Charlotte has apparently spent on your behalf without hesitation. She writes, "I told him you were reliable and honest, and that the workhouse was an unfortunate circumstance and not a reflection of your character. I hope I have not overstated the case." You read this sentence 3 times. You try to work out if she has overstated the case. You decide she has not overstated the case. You fold the letter with hands that are not steady, and you go to Fenwick, and you give your 24 hours notice, and you write it in the register beside entry 247, and Fenwick writes the date and the reason, position obtained, and you go back to the day room and you sit on the bench and you do not perform any of the things the bench normally requires you to perform. You just sit. Edward is in the corner. "Position obtained," you say. Not loud, not announcement, just information shared between 2 people who have been in the same room for 9 months. Edward nods once. His hands are still on his knees. "Good," he says. "That's good." You sit with him for a while. "When Samuel is discharged," you say. You don't finish the sentence. There is no finish available that is adequate. "I know," Edward says. You nod. You sit. The last morning. 5:30. The bolt. The door. Up. You're up already. You've been up for an hour, lying in the dark, watching the rectangle of the window go from black to grey to something that might eventually be pale, waiting for the sound you've heard 1,000 times, because in this case it means the last time. The last time the bolt, the last time pierces up, the last time the stone floor under your feet, the cold through the soles, the ice on the basin, breaking it now one final time with the particular motion your fist has learned, the cold water on your face, the tallow soap worn to nothing, a sliver. You use the last of it. Somebody else will get a new bar. The ward empties. You go to breakfast for the last time. You find your seat. You take the bowl, 6 ounces of gruel. You hold the bowl in both hands for a moment, the familiar weight of nothing, the thin warmth, the smell of warm water trying to be something. You eat it slowly. You make it last. At the end, when the bowl is empty, you look at the bottom of it. The scratched interior, the chipped enamel, the dent from where it was dropped. This bowl has fed you for 9 months. That is the thing that is simultaneously inadequate and true. This bowl that holds 6 ounces held you together in the specific literal sense for 9 months, and that is what is, and what has been, and what now is finished. You set it down. You go to the receiving office. The last time in the receiving room. Your clothes on the counter, folded. The smell of them again. Cedar and old cloth and yourself. You change in the small room with the bench and the hook. You walk through the main building, down the corridor, through the yard. Edward is in the yard. He's standing near the north wall facing it, which is the only time you've ever seen him face it. He doesn't look at you. He's looking at the wall. You stop beside him for a moment. You face the wall too. On the other side, the boys' yard, Samuel's yard, 40 feet of stone and air. Somewhere in the mortar of the wall between you, a wooden bird with rough wings is sitting in the dark. You stand there for a moment. Then you put your hand briefly on Edward's arm. Just a moment. Just the weight of a hand. And you walk toward the main gate. Pierce is there. He unlocks it. He opens it. He says, "Good luck." It is the first time he has said that to anyone, or the first time you've heard it. Maybe he says it to everyone. Maybe he doesn't. You will never know. You walk through the gate, cobbles, a cart going by, a dog, two women talking outside the terrace opposite. The ordinary afternoon of an ordinary street. You stand in it. You look at the building you just left, the brick facade, the symmetrical windows, the blank institutional face of it, which gives nothing away, which looks like a mill or a school or any other large Victorian building designed for the management of people. The gate is closed. You breathe in the coal smoke and the horse and the autumn and the absolute specific freedom of standing on a street without walls. You start walking. North Street, where Halsworth's warehouse is 6 blocks from here. You know the way. You have walked this city in your head 100 times during the dayroom hours, plotting the route on a map assembled from scraps of information, because having a destination to walk toward, even in imagination, was the available form of agency. You walk toward it now in your own body, in your own clothes, in the particular November light of the north of England, which is pale and diffuse and utterly beautiful to you at this moment in a way it has never been, and you're not sure it will ever be again. Quite this specific quality of ordinary beauty that only reveals itself by contrast. You pass a bakery. The smell comes out of it and stops you for a moment. Something warm and yeasty and straightforwardly food. Food without qualification. Food, that is what it is. You stand outside the bakery for a moment just breathing. A woman comes out with a loaf under her arm and gives you a look that is slightly startled. A young man standing outside her bakery staring with an expression she cannot interpret. And you realize what you must look like and you move on. You smile as you move on, which is a thing you haven't done in a while. Just a small one. But there. What Halsworth is a wool merchant of middle size who works out of a warehouse on North Street and deals in the transportation of raw and finished wool between the Yorkshire mills and the ports. He is 45, sandy-haired, with the practised briskness of a man who manages 15 people, and has learned that the management of 15 people requires a certain economy of engagement. He receives you in his office, which is a small room at the front of the warehouse, with a window overlooking North Street. He looks at you for a moment with the frank assessment of a man accustomed to evaluating material. "Charlotte Ashton's brother," he says. "Yes, sir." "Workhouse at Merton." "Yes, sir." He looks at your hands, the calloused palms, the tar still faintly in the nail beds. "Stone breaking?" 9 months. He nods. Something passes across his face that is not quite sentiment and not quite indifference. Something pragmatic. The assessment of a man who knows what 9 months of stone breaking does to a person's usefulness as a warehouse labourer. 8 shillings, 6 days. Warehouse opens at 7. You're on time or you're not employed. Understood? Understood. Mrs. Parr on Fell Street. Tell her I sent you. 3 shillings a week for the room, includes supper, leaves you 5. He stands up. The meeting is finished. At the door he says, without looking at you, "Your sister is a good woman. She spoke well for you. Don't give me reason to tell her she was wrong. You go to work. Different from oakum. Different from stone. The warehouse handles bales of wool. Raw fleece coming in from the farms. Processed tops going out to the mills. Finished cloth going to the merchants. The bales are large and heavy and require the kind of lifting that works different muscles from the hammer, different muscles from the picking bench. Your body adjusts in 2 weeks. The smell is animal and lanolin and something specific to wool processing that is not unpleasant but is total. It gets into your clothes, into your hair, and you carry it home to Mrs. Parr's in the evenings, and she notes it once, and then accepts it as a feature of your tenancy. The other workers, 4 men, varying ages. They take you in with the particular undemonstrative acceptance of working men who've been in a job long enough to be oriented toward the job rather than toward each other, which means that conversation is functional and assistance when needed is given without ceremony, and no one asks you much about where you've been. Once, in the 3rd week, a man called Darby, heaviest lifter in the warehouse, 40-something, arms like barge cables, says, without looking up from a bale he's cutting the ties on, "Merton Workhouse." "Yes," you say, "my brother-in-law was there. 64, died in the infirmary." You say nothing. "Just saying," Darby says. He cuts the last tie. "Just so you know somebody knows." He goes back to work. You go back to work. The room at Mrs. Parr's is 12 feet by 10. A bed, a window, a chest of drawers, a hook on the back of the door. The ceiling slopes on one side because the room is under the eaves. It is yours. You close the door behind you on the first evening and stand in the 12 by 10 room in the slanted ceiling quiet, and you listen to the absence of other breathing. No one else is in this room. It is your room. The window looks onto Fell Street, which is a back street of terraced houses with a gas lamp at the far corner that comes on at dusk and makes a small, soft circle of light in the dark. From the bed, you can see the lamp. From the bed, you can also see, if you angle yourself correctly, a thin strip of sky between the roof lines. The sky above Fell Street in November is the same sky as everywhere else. The stars, when they're out, are the same stars. The clouds are the same clouds, but you can see them from your bed. And there is no bell at 9 o'clock that locks the door from the outside. The door locks from the inside. You lock it from the inside on the first night just to feel the mechanism. The particular resistance of the bolt going home. The solidity of it. The fact that the locked state is a condition you have created and can reverse at will. You unlock it. Lock it again. You get into bed. The mattress is better than the workhouse mattress, and worse than the mattress you had in Stanwick as a child, and is exactly right. It is yours, and it holds the right shape, and it will accumulate in time. The specific geography of your body. You lie in the dark. Mrs. Parr's house has sounds. The house settling in the cold, the other tenants moving overhead, the distant street noise of Merton at evening. All of it unrestricted, unregulated, sounds that move through a house where people have chosen to be. You listen. Outside, the gas lamp at the far corner makes its small circle of light. The stars tonight are out. Here is the truth about this, and I need you to stay awake for 1 more minute to hear it. In the months that follow, 6 months, a year, 2 years, some of what the workhouse gave you will change. Not the knowledge. The knowledge stays. The hands that broke stone remember how to break stone. The posture that Thomas corrected stays corrected. The ability to work at 4 pounds without exceeding it, to eat slowly, to track the movements of authority without appearing to... These are skills that don't leave, but the sensation changes. The particular quality of walking through a door you can open from the inside. After a month you don't feel it each time. After 3 months you don't notice. The door is a door. The room is a room. The supper Mrs. Parr serves is supper, not the end of a day of 6 ounces, not a measure of abundance. This is how it works. This is how the mind protects you from living inside the contrast permanently, because living inside the contrast permanently is also a form of damage. You're supposed to acclimatize. You're supposed to let ordinary be ordinary again. But you will know. Even when you don't feel it, You will know. You will know what a bowl weighs when it holds enough, and what it weighs when it holds 6 ounces. You will know the difference, and you will carry the knowledge in a place slightly deeper than sensation. The bird in the wall, the captain murmuring to his ship in the evening corner, Thomas's hands flat on the infirmary blanket, Reeves feeding his pigeon. Entry 247. These are facts. These are history. These were people. And the system that made them numbers, that assigned them tally counter clicks, that locked the door on the night side and rang the bell on the morning side and measured them in ounces and pounds and quotas, that system was built by people who thought they were doing right. That is the most important thing to know. Not to frighten you with it, to make you careful. People who think they are doing right, applying rational principles to human suffering, measuring and categorizing and setting minimums. They produce ledgers like the one in the museum case. They produce bowls like the one in the museum case. History is full of people doing right, by their own accounting, with tools like those. Be careful with the tools you build. Be careful about what you decide other people need. Be careful about less eligibility as a principle for anything. The people it was applied to were not less. They were not other. They were Will Ashton from Stanwick with a worn jacket and 2 sisters in Bradford, and a father's hands trembling over a loom they could no longer operate. They were Edward with his invisible workbench. They were Thomas, whose precise eyes could read a mortar joint at a glance. They were the thin boy's voice through the wall, singing 30 seconds before silence took it back. They were a bird in the dark between the walls, carved by hands that knew how to make things in a place that had decided they should unmake them. You don't need to hold all of that right now. You've held enough tonight. You've held the bowl and the spike and the key. You've been in Ward B at 5:30 in the morning with the cold coming through the stone. You've eaten 6 ounces and worked 4 pounds and watched Thomas's hands and Edward's corner and the gap in the gate at Harker Street. You've been there. Now come back. Let the stone floor go cold without you on it. Let the 5:30 bolt ring for someone else, somewhere in the long past of things that have already happened and cannot be changed. Let the story settle. It is settling now in you, the way things settle after water has been disturbed. Slowly, the particles descending, the motion quieting, the surface going smooth and then stiller than smooth. The particular stillness that is the absence of disturbance. You're in your room with your door, your lock. You have more than 6 ounces. You have warmth. You have this voice keeping you company on the downward slope towards sleep. These are not small things. I know you know that. I know that some part of you has always known that, but knowing it in your chest, in the specific cellular weight of it, that's what tonight was for. Now, let it soften. Let the images slow, the bowl, the spike, the wooden bird, the gate. They're artifacts now. They're in their case. The museum is dark. The fluorescent lights are off. The climate control hums at its set temperature, and the objects in the glass cases are simply objects in glass cases, cooling slowly in the museum dark, the accumulated weight of their history perfectly quiet. Nobody is looking at them right now, just them in the dark, the bowl, the dent on the side, the chipped rim. How many mornings, how many pairs of hands? Let that count slow down, let it soften, let it become something without edges. You don't have to count it anymore. I've counted it for you. There was a world before your room. There are always worlds before the room. Centuries of them stacked underneath wherever you're sleeping, generation below generation, each one as real as this and as temporary and as utterly certain of its own presentness. In 1847, a young man lay in an attic room in Merton and listened to the street outside and thought about going home. He thought about the road north. He thought about his father's loom. He closed his eyes. He went down into sleep the same way you're going down into sleep right now. The same architecture of consciousness releasing its grip. The same sequence of slackening. The thoughts first, then the images, then the particular quality of attention that holds the boundary between in here and out there. The boundary softens. It softens in you now. You are warm enough. You have fed enough. You are lying in something that holds the shape of your body. Nobody will ring a bell until you are ready for it. The gas lamp at the far corner of Fell Street makes its small circle of light in the dark. The circle doesn't change. It doesn't know what it illuminates or what passes through it. It just makes its circle, reliably, night after night, the same diameter, the same pale gold. Inside the circle of light the cobblestones are visible, the texture of them, the particular irregular pattern that has been there for years and will be there after the lamp is replaced and the street is changed and the city grows up and over and around this moment. The cobblestones in the lamplight. Just that. Just the lamplight on the cobblestones in November 1847 on Fell Street in Merton in the north of England, where a young man is in a room with a window and a door that locks from the inside. Just that. Will Ashton is asleep. He will wake in the morning and walk to Halsworth's warehouse and lift bales of wool for 8 hours and walk back and eat Mrs. Parr's supper and go to bed. He will do this tomorrow and the day after. He will, in time, save enough to go home to Stanwick. He will sit with his father, and they will not talk exactly about what happened, because there is not a language available in 1847 that adequately bridges a father and a son across 9 months of things the father can't know. But they will sit together and the loom will be there and the clay pots on the windowsill and the particular light of Stanwick in the late afternoons. He will be all right. He will carry the bowl for the rest of his life in the way you now carry it, not a burden, a fact, a weight that teaches the hand to appreciate what it holds. And you have carried it tonight. You have been generous enough to let this story in, to follow it from the 5:30 bolt to the warmth of Mrs. Parr's, and all the stone and oakum and gruel and cold water and wooden birds, and impossible distances between walls, and the things that love finds a way to do inside the space that cruelty carves out for it. You have been generous enough. Now receive what the night offers, which is quiet and warmth, and the particular permission that sleep always offers, which is, you can stop now. You have done enough today. You have been present in the world long enough for this particular day. You have crossed it, and now it is done, and the night is not a continuation of the day, but a different state entirely, a state where the record of the day is kept, and the record of the day is kept, and the record of the day is kept. And in the morning it will all still be there. But that is the morning. This is now. Now is the slow pull. Now is the boundary softening. Now is the breath you're taking, longer, slower, the chest dropping slightly further at the bottom of the exhale, and the breath after that one, even slower, even more complete. Now is the thoughts thinning. They're still there. The thoughts. They don't disappear. They thin. The way a crowd thins when people are going home, when the urgency of the event has passed, and the crowd that felt solid becomes porous, and the porous crowd becomes scattered, and the scattered individuals become simply figures at a distance going about the business of their own lives. Your thoughts are going home. Let them. The church bell somewhere. Not Merton, not 5:30. Just the church bell of wherever you are in the world right now, at this hour, in this specific darkness. It rings the hour, or the half, or it doesn't ring. Maybe where you are there is no church bell, and instead there is the heating system in the wall, or the traffic still moving on the road outside, or the breathing of the person sleeping beside you. These are your sounds. These are the sounds of your ordinary life, which is not ordinary, which has history underneath it 10 layers deep, which carries in its mundane functioning the accumulated decisions and accidents and work of generations. These sounds belong to you. You belong to them. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. You are warm, you are fed. You're in a room that contains you safely. The bowl is in the museum case. The door locks from the inside. Let sleep take you. The way sleep has always taken you. The way sleep takes everyone. Through the same door. Into the same dark. Into whatever the mind finds when it goes in without the light. You are ready for that. You've been ready for a while. The last thing you're holding is the weight of tonight's knowing. The weight of the bowl and the bird and the names in the ledger. And now you're setting that down too. Gently, not forgetting. Setting it down in a place you can find it again. It will be there in the morning. Right now, all that's needed from you is this. The next breath, slow. And the next one, slower. And the gradual, reliable, ancient human process of going away from the day and into the place where the day cannot follow, into the quiet, into the warm, into the rest that the body has been earning since 5:30 in the morning of whatever morning is yours. You've earned this. Take it. Good night.